Ireland is often seen as Western Europe's success story, modernised throughout the 20th century to become Silicon Valley's favourite spot for setting up companies across the Atlantic. But such progress isn't felt everywhere, and one issue the country has suffered with for years is housing. Ireland has a baffling housing problem with no clear end in sight. The question is, how did Ireland land itself in a housing crisis? Who's to blame? What will the next 30 years look like? And how can we clamber out of this property-shaped hole? Between 1993 and 2006, Ireland experienced a time of crazy economic growth. This period, known as the Celtic Tiger, began Ireland's journey towards a housing disaster, with Ireland's property market feeling the pressure of increasing demand and prices becoming increasingly unaffordable for everyday buyers. During this period, Ireland adopted a lax approach to housing, prioritising market-led development, deregulation and lower taxes. There wasn't a lot of regulation, and it was relaxed for bankers and construction companies.
Wanking fucking bankers.
A property bubble was created, and suddenly there was far too much supply. As is the case with most bubbles, they'd eventually burst, and that just happened in a spectacularly bad way between 2007 and 2012, which is what Irish people would call the crash period. The economy tanked, and Ireland's brief period of unending prosperity came to a grinding halt. So during the crash, there was a load of crazy shit that happened. Ghost estates. Estates that were built but nobody bought the houses for. People weren't able to pay their mortgages, and there was a complete halt in social housing. And during the crash, homelessness became a much wider issue. Many normal everyday people who had mortgages, who had housing, no longer could afford it anymore, and they actually lost everything. Between 2008 and 2011, homelessness increased in Ireland by 68%. As a result of virtually no new rental homes being built in Dublin over the past decade, the city boasts Ireland's highest rents. And while the pandemic prompted a flood of Airbnbs into the rental market and caused a 0.8% decrease in Dublin rents during Q3 of 2020, a decrease in rents is probably not going to last. Almost 1 in 5 households now live in a privately rented home, compared to 1 in 10 years ago. So a lot more people are renting than owning homes. Dublin is the 5th most expensive city to rent in Europe, beating cities like Madrid, Paris and Berlin. We don't even have the freaking Eiffel Tower. Ireland's population is set to hit 6 million people by 2051. And one report estimates 2.8 million households in the country by then, averaging a creation of 32,000 homes needed between now and 2051. And to keep up with this growing demand, Ireland will have to radically transform its model for housing. So I wanted to have a look at what are some of the different solutions to how we can actually solve this problem. One obvious way is to build upwards. Now, Ireland's a bit of an outlier compared to other European nations. The average size of a Dublin building is about 4 to 6 stories, because we have a thing called the skyscraper ban, which limits buildings to 60 metres in height. So our options are already sort of limited. One option is co-living. In short, it means that tenants have their own bedrooms and personal space, but they share communal areas like kitchens, living rooms, recreational areas with other people. Ireland's housing minister recently announced a ban on the practice over fears it would create glorified tenement buildings, so a load of people squeezed into a small space. Austria, a country often hailed being one of the happiest countries in the world, has a public housing scheme that transformed its city. The Vienna model sees a scheme in the capital where 2/3 live in public housing units. The cost rental model allows tenants to pay based on construction and maintenance costs and not market rent. But there are other solutions. If we look at Finland, they've had widespread success of tackling homelessness by prioritising the building of permanent houses for those on the streets. Finland's Housing First model gave homeless people immediate access to housing, regular meeting with counsellors, people can choose where they want to live, support for getting jobs, detox from drugs, repairing broken family relationships, and ultimately encourage them to achieve their goals. With Finland boasting Europe's most promising model for tackling the issue, Ireland could definitely take a leaf out of their book. So I guess the question is, well, what do we do now? There are a couple different ways of tackling this problem. Obviously, there's the government side of it where we need them to invest in more housing. They potentially need to look at more solutions as to how they can actually create more housing. Is it making tiny homes? Is it building upwards, which we haven't really been able to do, and we're stuck to our 60-meter height of buildings? Homelessness throughout my childhood into young adulthood now has only ever gotten worse. I definitely see it as something that can be changed and can be made better if the correct time, energy, effort and money is put into the problem. So I'm interested to hear what your guys' opinions are. If you're in different countries watching this, your government has different solutions as to how you're going to solve homelessness, and I'd be interested to hear those thoughts below.